In your project, the first one, project number one, you're asked to assess some TED Talk resources by some of our greatest minds, scholars who have given TED Talks and summarize a lot of their research. Some of those are pretty old, but many of those are big names. Some of those are the biggest names that we have in social psychology. Some of those have aged rather well. Some of them have aged very badly. And they make a lot of claims. And TED Talks have this inclination to give you a lot of facts about the world, about scientific evidence. And we saw a little bit that even with things in social psychology dating back to the 1960s, 70s, 80s, Stanford experiment, bystander effect, things that we read in almost every social psychology book, we realize that actually the evidence is very problematic. And if we read the more recent evidence summarized by American psychologists, summarized by meta-analysis, summarized by replication, then we realize that actually the evidence is a lot more complicated, and sometimes it's completely the opposite, a reversal of what the original found. So in your projects, you need to lay out the claims in stage one and see what others have done before you. And then in stage two, you need to analyze and assess these claims in order to see, is this fact? Is this not fact? And many of those seem very intuitive to us. So the topic that we have for the semester is altruism and pro-social behavior. And our gut intuitions often tell us things that seem to make a lot of sense. And in our minds, everything just seems as if things are natural and this is the way things should go. But actually, when you go down and break it into components, into parts, you realize there's a lot of things there that we actually don't know. If somebody makes a very broad claim, if you break it down to smaller claims, then maybe you'll see that the broad claim does not make a lot of sense, and you need to revisit each and every one of the smaller components. So today we're going to visit a very broad claim about the nature of the world. Before we dealt with the nature of mankind, are we good or are we bad? And now it's a very broad question of how are we doing? Is the world getting better or is the world getting worse? This is a very, very broad thing to think about. We experience something. So we come to class, we go to university, we talk to our friends, we open the social media, we listen to the news, and then we have this gut intuition telling us, oh my gosh, things are not going so well. Or, oh my gosh, this is such a wonderful day. And then we need to make an assessment of, so do we think that the world is getting better or not? How do we know this? How do we break it apart into little components in order to make this kind of assessment? So today I'm going to try and work with you on how we make such assessment. How do we break this large component into smaller parts? How do we make sure that each and every one of these components is a fact, is true, is based on the most recent up-to-date scientific evidence? Okay. So the name that we have for this, we're going to meet Hans Rosling, unfortunately passed away, but a very lively guy who had the title of Factfulness. So basing what we think about the world, about ourselves, about everything on facts, on scientific evidence, right? So we're going to start with something very simple about books and countries. I'm going to show you a video and I'm going to ask you questions about facts. And even if you know nothing about those facts, you need to make some kind of an assessment. And I want you to use the best way that you know how in order to make this kind of assessment, and then we'll think about all of this together. You as individuals, and then you together as a group, okay? So first, I'll ask you to go on the Mentimeter. All right, so this is the first question I have for you. The Old Testament, many of you are not Christian, I imagine, or Jewish, but monotheistic religions, Judaism and Christianity is based on the Bible. And there's typically the Old Testament and the New Testament. And one of the first things I want to ask you, and you will see very soon why I'm asking you this specific question, is how many books are there in the Old Testament and the Bible? Try and estimate by giving a range, a low bound and a high bound. And I want you to put the low bound and the high bound in a way that would give you, that represents 95% confidence that your answer will be between these two bounds, okay? Try and think about this. Even if you don't know anything about this, try and think and enter your estimate. This will become very important in the video that I'll show you in a second. Okay, so think about this. A number between 0 and 1,000. The important thing here is not necessarily for you to know the answer, but for you to align the answers that you give with the confidence of 95%. So that you know, you make sure that you know that you're within this bound. Okay? So this is the first one. All right. We have 9 questions, 10 questions answered. The next one is, how many countries are in Africa? Try and estimate by giving a range, a number between 0 to 1,000, a low bound and a high bound. Good. So now that we have your estimates for the number of books in the Old Testament and the number of countries in Africa, there's a video from a very popular TV show, Brain Games. I strongly recommend Brain Games because they do a lot of fun things. They take psychology and cognition, and they go to people in the street and try to confront them with all of this. So let's see how we are doing with giving estimates.
Don't believe your brain is overconfident? Deception specialist Apollo Robbins is hitting the streets with a game designed to prove you wrong.
I want to play a game with you real quick.
Apollo is going to ask people on the street some trivia questions, and you can play along at home.
That's a good start, huh?
You don't have to know the exact answer to each of the questions, but just give a range that you're completely confident encompasses the answer. For instance, if I ask you how many continents there are, and you're not sure of the answer, but you think it's around 7, all you have to do is come up with a range of numbers that you're confident includes the right answer, like 4 to 12. Got it?
Okay.
Okay.
Ready for the first one?
What do you want below?
I guarantee it's harder than you think. This is the Bible. How many books make up the Old Testament? Remember, all you have to do is pick a range. Are you feeling pretty confident in your answer? Because we're pretty confident you just got it wrong.
Okay, so let's see how well we did with this. So now you understand why I asked this question. All right, so we have an estimation of the number of books in the Old Testament being somewhere between 200, 199, and 568. What's interesting is that almost every semester I change the range of the scales, and there's something called anchoring. So the more I shift it up, the more the estimates go higher. When I first gave it 0 to 100, it was like on a very similar range, but within 0 to 100. So now it's 10 times more. Very, very interesting. All right.
Number of books in the Old Testament. It's a range.
Oh, 10.
So we're going to say 10 books in the Old Testament. And the high number there could possibly be? 15. 7, okay. And how high would you go?
25.
All right, so over there you can see differences between you and this group. They did not have a range. You had a range, 0 to 1,000. You've adjusted based on that range. When you ask people on the street how many books are there in the Old Testament, they're also a little bit maybe closer to Christianity, so maybe they know a little bit more about Christianity or what the Old Testament is about, but they give a very low estimate. It's very, very low compared to what we gave over here, right? What else did you notice about their estimates? What's weird about these estimates? They're very specific. They're quite narrow, right? Seems like they have a high confidence, 10 to 15. Seems like they know that this is within that range, right? Right. So let's see how this unfolds.
What do you think? Do you have your range? The answer is 39.
It's actually 39 books in the Old Testament.
All you had to do was give a range that could, without a doubt, include that number. Not so easy, is it? Let's try another. How many countries are in Africa?
The number.
All right, let's see how we did with Africa. So between 66 and 217. That's a very high range, very broad range. Anything you want to say about this range before I show you what the answer is?
Number of countries in Africa?
17.
17. What's your high answer?
30.
30.
Yes.
Okay.
0.
And high?
I'll say 24.
Do you have your answer? Are you confident the correct answer fits within your range? The answer is 57. So how'd you do?
So how did we do? Got it within our range, so that's good. The first one we didn't get correctly. The second one we got correctly. It was within the range.
Better this time?
Oh, sorry, you missed on that one.
Getting killed.
What exactly does this game have to do with overconfidence? Think about it. You likely had no idea for certain how many countries were in Africa.
So why would you limit the range you gave? Even a little bit.
Almost all of our participants gave extremely small ranges, even though they didn't have a clue. Now are you catching on? You don't need to know the answers to any of these.
Length of the Mississippi River in miles. What would you say the low is?
1.
1? Okay, I think you got part of the system down. High?
3,000.
And submit. Bingo, you got one right. See?
Yeah, I'm getting
You see
this
what the
game.
system is?
Yeah.
You just need to give a big enough range. If any of these answers fell outside your ranges, that means that like 79% of our participants, you suffer from overconfidence.
So we have this underconfidence and overconfidence. We have a forecast of how much we know about the world, and we have the percentage that we get correct. If our percentage is higher, or percentage correct is over our forecast, then we're underconfident. But if the forecast is that we're doing a lot better and we're a lot more accurate than what we actually are, then this is overconfidence. And our aim is to be somewhere between these two, to be very, very well calibrated. So if there's something that we think that we know 100% sure, that we'll be 100% right about it all the time. If we don't know anything about the topic, then we'll need to be able to say that our forecast is that will be right 0% of the time. To be calibrated, it means that we're going to have one correlation between the forecast and the numbers that we get correct. So in order for you to experience a little bit what this means, we're going to do a little bit of an exercise. And it's an exercise about how we experience the world and what we know about the world. So there's a person very well known in the effective altruism movement. Her name is Gilad, and we're going to see her soon. And she has a very nice book called The Scout Mindset. And she came up with this exercise. And this exercise has a lot of different questions about facts in our world. Some of those you may know the answer for. Some of those you might not know the answer for. The most important thing is not whether you know the answer to these questions or not, but whether you can calibrate the level of confidence that you have to the answers that you give. As you can see, you've got a list of questions that are dichotomous, or it's true or false. Then you have your level of calibration. So I'm asking you to make a lot of predictions. And you need to calibrate what you think, how confident you are about the answer to the way that you answered it. So start following all the questions. I'm going to give you 5-10 minutes, depending on how fast you'll go with this. First, answer all of these questions. Then I'm going to give you the answers to those. And then you'll be able to check the accuracy of how you answer those questions. And then you'll be able to check what your calibration is. Are you well calibrated or not well calibrated? So you can start by looking at the question and then asking yourself, how many am I going to get correct here? Questions about the world, okay? Try and make some kind of prediction. How many you will get correct? How many your classmates are going to get correct? And then start following the questions one by one. Right, if you finish, then just help me with the Mentimeter and indicate how many you think you will get correctly, how many you think others will get correctly. Okay, let's start. Now you've got all the answers. So you can check for each question whether you got it right or wrong. And then on the other side of the page that you got, you can now insert your calibration. So for those that you answered 55% confident, how accurate were you for those? 65, 75, 85, 95%? And then you can put this under the plot to see if you're overconfident or underconfident. So after you plotted everything on the graph, your graph, you can make an assessment whether you're overconfident or underconfident, you're well calibrated or not. But down here on the left of this figure, it says that these figures come from something called super forecasting. A guy called Pitlock wrote this with another one, Gardner. Super forecasting. So what is this about? Why would you want to do this kind of silly exercise in an advanced social psychology class, right? All these facts about the world. So it turns out that this is a big field in social psychology on how to do forecasting and whether we're overconfident or underconfident, how to make decisions. So whenever we need to address urgent challenges in the world about poverty and health, existential risks, the takeover of AI, and all of these things that are coming, climate change, we need to have some kind of an estimation of what is the likelihood that this is going to happen or not. Now, we can make all kinds of predictions. We can make predictions about the stock market will go up, the stock market will go down. Advanced social psychology is going to be great, advanced social psychology is going to suck. And because you have a lot of these estimations, then over time, now you're in your third or fourth year, you can make a lot of these predictions and then test your predictions afterwards to see what the accuracy was. So before you take the first class in the first year, you say, I think it's going to suck or I think it's going to be great. And then afterwards, you can revisit that. I'm going to do great, I'm going to do badly. And you can revisit that. You can actually make this even more accurate. You can predict the score, the grade that you're going to get, and see if you're accurate or not accurate. And then over time, adjust your calibration so that you'll have a better understanding of how to forecast the future. So for example, if you have a very high confidence that a certain course is going to go very, very badly, maybe you can take a different course instead, or a certain course that you're not going to like very much. Take a different course, right? So it's becoming more and more important for us to try and forecast the future. But the problem is, how do we do this? You can make actually a lot of money by forecasting the future. So we want to know whether existential risk, if climate change is going to happen, not happen, what kind of implications it's going to have in the economy, on countries, on us personally. We need to make a lot of predictions. Now, there's a lot of different strategies in judgment decision making and advanced social psychology to try and get closer to the truth. One of them is crowdsourcing. So maybe one person might be off, but if we sample a lot of experts, then on average, wisdom of the crowd, they're going to get a little bit closer, perhaps to the truth, unless there's an inherent bias in there, right? What Phil Petlock decided to do, together with the American Army, Navy, NSA, CIA, is to have a competition and to get all people from around the world to have forecasting of things that are going to happen in the future. And they ran this many, many years, over 2 decades. We try to see whether there are some people that are better forecasters than others. And the results are summarized in super forecasting, where Phil Petlock identified people who are super forecasters. And these were not the people with the most information. These were not the CIA or NSA experts that had all the information available to them. Were actually people like you and me that just had very good ways of addressing how to collect information, how to assess information, how to integrate information into making a decision. So Julia Galler and Effective Altruism really care about this, because if you want to tackle these challenges, then we want to have the super forecasters, these experts, the ones that know the best how to calibrate in order to predict what's going to happen next and what we should focus on. Then they set up a lot of platforms, prediction platforms. One of the most popular one is Metaculus, C-U-L-U-S, where they try to, so actually any of you can participate in this. Then later, and now you can go on this platform and see how it's done. You take all the super forecasters and you do some kind of LLM AI in order to create a super forecaster. So now Metaculus as a platform has the ability to take all the super forecasters and take their prediction and then arrive at something that is very well calibrated. So you can see this calibration in Metaculus to see how the AI is doing when it aggregates all the super forecasters. So for example, if you have a question about is the economy going to be better or worse, housing going to be better or worse in 2026, if somebody is going to win the election or not, you can go to Metaculus and you can see the prediction markets and how people are betting on this in order to see what is the likelihood of things happening or not. These have practical implications for all of us. We can learn how to do this. So the exercise that you did today, you can do with everything in your life. But all the decisions that you're making, financial, studies, last session that we're going to do about career choice, what kind of career I want to do, what is going to be a good calibration for me, what do I feel confident about, and then assess whether you want to change what it is that you want to do. I'll just say that one of the replications that we've done is a replication of a classic article from the 1970s by Bauer Fischoff. He was one of the first people who identified the problem of not being calibrated, so having overconfidence regarding what it is that you think that you know about the world. So you can see, for a variety of general knowledge questions, very much like your own, subject first chose the most likely answer and then indicated the degree of certainty that the answers they had selected were in fact correct. So he did something very similar to what you did over here. He gave this to people, and then he showed that people tend to be overconfident. So just by show of hands, now that you have your calibration, how many of you here in the classroom tended to be overconfident? Raise your hand. A little bit? Huh? Maybe? Okay, good. How many of you were underconfident? Raise your hand. Some of you? Okay. So more overconfident than underconfident. How many of you were all over the place, like I saw over here? Some of you were? Okay. So we had more people that were overconfident, at least for those who voted, more overconfident people than underconfident people. And some people all over the place, and some people probably well calibrated. So we wanted to see whether we can revisit this. So in the first year that I ran advanced social psychology at HKU, I gave this as an exercise. So you can see all the Anthony's names, Danny over here, Coco, yeah. So people who I know, and Danny afterwards proceeded to do a thesis with me. So we ran 2 replications of this. One we did with a prolific sample, and one we did with an entered sample. So these are online labor markets. These are very similar to the platform that we'll use in order to collect your data. What is it that I do? And this is how I do all of my replications and all of the things that I collect data for in the course, is that these are online labor markets. There are people out there that can be paid. You can give them money in order to do any kind of task. If you want somebody to punch in numbers for you or to go search for something for you, you can say, this is the task and this is the amount of money that I am going to pay. If you do this successfully, then you'll get this amount of money. The task that I give them is to complete my survey. And typically what they get is minimum wage in the US, depending where you are, but the federal minimum wage is 7.5, 7 to 5 US dollars. And then different states have something like 12 US dollars, 10 US dollars per hour, and so forth. So what is it that I say? I say, for example, I have a task of 5 minutes or something like what you did, 10 minutes. So I will pay you $10 or $7.5 divided by 6. So 60 minutes, 10 minutes divided by 6. And this is the amount of money that I pay. So this is a very cheap way of collecting data. If I run this with American samples on Prolific and Amazon Mechanical Turk, then I can get 1,000 people to respond. In this case, I think we had 560 and 600 within 1 or 2 hours. So I set up a link to the call checks. I put it out there. And then out of 200,000 people, some people respond to this very, very fast. Within 1 hour, I have my whole sample. So this is what we did in the first courses that I ran in advanced social psychology. We conducted a replication of fish off about overconfidence, and we gave people a link to the call checks, and then we paid them in order to come in and participate. And you can see over here that in both cases, with both of these samples, they worked independently. They peer-reviewed each other, but worked independently, and they came to the same conclusion. So this replication generally found the same findings as the original article. It's overconfident. Was not exhibited when people had low confidence, but exhibited when people had high confidence. So in addition to this, we found strong empirical support for overconfidence hypothesis. So we were able to do 2 successful replications of overconfidence many, many years later, 50 years later, after the original article. So Daniel Kahneman is the founder, the brains behind the judgment and decision-making and later behavioral economics. He's the only psychologist to ever receive the Nobel Prize. Unfortunately, he died last year. Very sad for all of us. Many of the things that I do my research on and many of the things we conducted here with HBU students, judgment decision-making is based on his work. His earlier work in the 1970s, together with a person called Amos Tversky, really revolutionized the whole way that we think about decision-making, the way that we think about psychology. And what's nice about Daniel Kahneman is that he's a very humble person. So unlike a lot of the people that you typically see on TED Talks, he tries to be very, very careful. So it's always a pleasure to see him react to some of the questions and the way that he is being interviewed. So this is what he has to say about overconfidence.
You know, society rewards overconfidence. We want our leaders to be overconfident. I mean, if they told us the truth about the uncertainty, we would discard them in favor of other leaders who sort of give an impression that they know what they're doing. We want overconfidence, we support it, we sustain it, and there is an awful lot of it. I mean, most of what we read in the paper is overconfidence. Sometimes it's catastrophic. Just about every war that you see, I think that's a general rule, there are optimists among the generals, and there are optimists on both sides. And that is true for a lot of litigation as well. So a lot of conflict is fed by overconfidence. There is an interesting story here of 2 biases that work in opposite directions. So one familiar, you can call it bias, but is what we call loss aversion. People put a lot more weight on negative events than on positive events, on losses than on gains. So that's one principle. You know, if people are to gamble money on the toss of a coin, and they stand to lose $100, they will demand more than $200 to accept the gamble, which is in some ways ridiculously risk averse. So people are loss averse. On the other hand, they're optimistic. And so many of the decisions that people make, especially in starting new businesses, I mean, that is where it's been studied most extensively, people think they will succeed. They open a restaurant because they think they will succeed. But in fact, less than a third of small businesses survive for 5 years. So clearly, overconfidence is rife. And overconfidence and loss aversion seem to be acting in opposite directions. You have to distinguish the perspective of the individual from the perspective of society. I think for society, it is probably very good that we have a lot of optimistic entrepreneurs, who think they will succeed, although most of them fail. And most of them really do not know the odds. It is not true that they know the odds and they take the risks willingly. Many of them, most of them probably do not know the odds. From the point of view of the individuals, it is not always good to be optimistic. For example, I have no interest whatsoever in my financial advisor being an optimist. I don't care for that. For an entrepreneur, it may be a good thing to be an optimist because it will make him or her persevere more. We know that being an optimist is useful under some conditions. It is not always useful in making decisions.
Yeah, so I think Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky really changed economics. Even though they're psychologists, they formed behavioral economics, and they went against people assuming, so the Homo economicus, the economists always assume that everybody has access to all information and everybody acts on that information. And they made a very simple argument that actually people don't have all of the information, and even when they have all the information, they don't act upon that information, and they have a lot of these heuristics, shortcuts, or biases that lead them to suboptimal decisions in making decisions that are wrong. One of the things that was identified together with Bauer-Fischoff is overconfidence. And at the beginning, it seemed like, and you would hear Kahneman talk about this again and again, that overconfidence is one of the biggest illnesses of our societies, where people just make a lot of mistakes in thinking that something is going to work brilliantly, when actually, in reality, all indications are against this. So a lot of things are happening in the last month in the US, and a lot of policies, and a lot of things regarding the war in the Ukraine, and where I grew up in Israel, a lot of overconfidence there and optimism generally about what's going to happen, and then catastrophic results for that. So overconfidence is one of the earliest phenomenon that we heard about. And then came this person, Don Moore, that said it's not just a problem of overconfidence, but actually we have two sides to this. Some of us are overconfident and some of us are underconfident. And what we actually need to do is to calibrate this very well. Don Moore actually cares very much about open science and replications, and he visited Hong Kong not too long ago in order to talk to us about how to do replication. So he does very similar things to what we did here at HQ over there in Berkeley. And this is one of his recent books that came out, I think, during the pandemic, perfectly confident about how to calibrate your decision wisely. Very prolific researcher, has a lot of impact, and is really having an impact on the field in terms of how to address the issue of forecasting.
Hi, I'm Don Moore, author of Perfectly Confident, and I've been studying confidence and overconfidence for over 20 years. My research has examined the different manifestations of both overconfidence and underconfidence. They're predictable circumstances under which most people believe that they're better than others. For instance, when I ask my students to rank themselves relative to the rest of the class with regard to honesty, about 80% of the class claims to be in the top half. Their views, while obviously erroneous, might nevertheless be justifiable if we consider the fact that most of us are honest about most things most of the time. Moreover, we can't be quite as certain about others, since we only observe what they say and we cannot know whether they truly believe it. So it's reasonable to believe that we're more honest than others. On the other hand, those very same students believe that they're worse jugglers than their classmates. The majority of them put themselves in the bottom half of the class. Most of them cannot juggle, but they suspect that some among them may have had a prior career in the circus, so it might be reasonable to think that they're worse jugglers than their classmates. Overconfidence is a real problem, but so is underconfidence. In the words of Teddy Roosevelt, I am just as little disposed to give way to undue pessimism as to undue and arrogant optimism. Both our virtues and defects should be taken into account. Overconfidence prompts us to take risks that will fail, or claim more than we deserve. These are errors of commission. On the other hand, underconfidence prompts errors of omission. We avoid opportunities, competitions, and ventures in which we could have succeeded. Both are errors. The alternative? Calibrate your beliefs accurately. You should believe the truth.
Yeah, easier said than done, but we'll learn a few skills on how to do this. I'll just give you one example that I thought was brilliant from Julia Galef. So she has the scout mindset, and she gives the example of Spock. How many of you know who this guy is? Heard of Spock before? How many of you have never heard of Spock before? So he comes from Star Trek. Star Trek is a TV series that ran during the 1970s, and since then there was Star Trek The Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and a bunch of movies. This is one of the movies. So originally, this was the guy here on the left, but then the more recent movies about Star Trek featured this guy over here on the right. And Julia Galef makes a very interesting analysis in her book about Spock and whether Spock is well calibrated or not. I'll just say something about Spock. Spock is a Vulcan. He is not human. So you can see from his ears that he has pointed ears. So he comes from a different planet. And in this planet, people use rational thought. Everything is logical. And this is opposed to who? Who is the person who is the opposite of? James T. Kirk, who is the captain of the Enterprise. So together, he is the officer, and James T. Kirk is the leader and the person who is in charge of everything. And Spock, as the logical one, is always opposed to James T. Kirk, who uses gut intuition, is very, very human, runs into danger, and makes a lot of immediate decisions about how to act or not. So here's an analysis of what Spock does in the Star Trek series. So she made this analysis that when Spock thinks that something is impossible, it happens 83% of the time. When Spock thinks that something is very unlikely, it happens 50% of the time. When Spock thinks that something is unlikely, 50% of the time, and so forth. And now you can see that after she wrote this book and came out with this, a lot of geeks like me were very excited about somebody analyzing Spock in order to see whether he's a good forecaster or not. And then she did exactly what you guys did. She took from all the TV series, after looking at everything that Spock did, she put this on this calibration to see whether he's perfectly calibrated or not. You can see over here that when Spock thinks that something is 100% likely, it only happens, a certain amount of the time. So his calibration is really off. And this is what makes Star Trek to be such a fun series, because he always says to James T. Kirk, Enterprise should not do this because this is an impossibility. And a second later, James T. Kirk takes the Enterprise and does exactly the thing that was supposedly impossible. So there's a lot of quotes to look at if you want to look at this a little bit later. And you can read about this and hear Julia talk about this on a TEDx talk. Very, very interesting book about how to adopt count mindset. So she differentiates between two different kinds of mindsets. One is a soldier mindset, where people just want to reconfirm what is it that they believe about the world. So, for example, if we think that the economy is really, really bad, then you will find all the evidence in order to support that claim that the world is really, really bad. But then the scout mindset wants to find out, is the world really bad? Is it improving or is it getting worse? How do we know? What persons do I need to seek out in order to find the truth? The scout mindset is just being curious about the world, is going after the facts and making sure that you're calibrated. Okay? We're going to do a little bit of a competition between all of you regarding general knowledge. What's happening in the world? For that, I need you to go on the Menti. This is a different Menti, a different number, and you've got the QR code. So in order to participate, please scan this, and we'll start with a very basic question. This is not a quiz question. This is your gut intuition. So is the world getting better, getting worse, neither getting better or getting worse? It will just give us some kind of like an understanding of what is the general mindset in this classroom, okay? Another question that usually comes after this, just something for you to think about. You can replace this question with many other kinds of questions. One of the questions that I like to ask students, and we can have a whole discussion about this, but we're not going to do it today, is if you could have been born or lived in any time up until today in the history of mankind, when would you rather be born, right? So many times people come out with a lot of feelings that perhaps things were better in the 1990s, perhaps things were better in the 1960s. Perhaps we need to go way back, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. That's when things were really, really good. Today, everything is really horrible compared to what happened 200 and 300 years ago. So I want us to take all these intuitions that we have over here and to try and assess this in some way, okay? All right. So we'll start with this competition. We've got 17 players, and we'll start the game. You'll get a response every time, so you'll know whether you were correct or not. All right, look at your device. In all low-income countries across the world today, how many girls finish primary school? 20%, 40%, 60%. Good. 20% is wrong. 60% is right. All right. So this is how it's going to go. You can see your names over here. So you've got Dragonite doing very well. Let's keep going. Where does the majority of the world population live today? Low-income countries, middle-income countries, high-income countries. Answer is middle-income countries. Question 3. In the last 20 years, the proportion of world population living in extreme poverty has almost doubled, remained more or less the same, almost half. Almost half is correct. Next one. What is the life expectancy of the world today? 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. Here in Hong Kong, we're very fortunate, among the highest in the world. 70 years is correct. Keep going. There are 2 billion children in the world today, age 0 to 15 years old. How many children will there be in the year 2100 according to the UN? 2 billion is correct. The UN predicts that by 2100, the world population will have increased by another 4 billion people. What is the main reason? Yeah, a lot get this wrong, I can see. You can see why you would believe that. How did the number of deaths per year from natural disasters change over the last 100 years? More than double, remain the same, decreased to less than half. That is correct, decreased to less than half. Roughly 7 billion people in the world today. Which map shows best where they live? Which person in the figure represents 1 billion people? Most of the people in Asia. How many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? 80% is right. Worldwide, 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school. On average, how many years women of the same age spent in school? 9 years it is. 1996, tigers, giant pandas, and black rhinos were all listed as endangered. How many of these three species are more critically endangered today? 2 of them, 1 of them, none of them. None of them is right. How many people in the world have some access to electricity? 20%, 50%, 80%. Global climate experts believe that over the next 100 years, the average temperature will get warmer, remain the same, or get colder. All right, get warmer. So who got the most? Art store. Well done. Thanks for taking part. So that represents 10 questions out of 13. And we've got a bunch of 9s, a bunch of 8s, a bunch of 7s. Okay? So with 13 questions, 7 is about getting half right, more or less. Right? So these are the top ones. I'm guessing there's a lot lower than this. The reason why I'm showing you this whole thing is because Hans Rosling, over there on the left with Factfulness, has made a big revolution trying to base us on facts. So when we hear all kinds of things in TED Talks and when we open things in the media and read the newspapers, we really need to ask ourselves, what are the facts and what do we know about the world? And he has made it his mission to try and communicate facts to others and help others to understand what's happening and how to get facts and information. More recently, Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now, came out during the pandemic, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. So removing all of the biases, all of the overconfidence, all of the loss aversion, all the negativity bias in order to make sure that we're well calibrated. Hans Rosling, I don't know if you can see this, but it's a little bit smaller, also has a very optimistic message for you. So it seems like in the way that you answered, some of you perhaps saw the world as a little bit darker than it really is. We have made a lot of progress. And what's interesting for us is that once we plot everything in a nice graph and we see the progress over the many years, last 100 years, 150 years, then we see this progress very, very clearly. And this is what Hans Rosling really specialized in. And finally, he wrote 10 reasons why we're wrong about the world and why things are better than you think. So I'll introduce you to Hans Rosling. It's very unfortunate that he's not with us anymore today. And he has a very entertaining way of demonstrating this. He did this back in the early 2000s. Back then, there was no big platforms. The internet was just starting out. And he here introduced for the first time the platform called Gapminder, that back then was very, very basic and ran on Windows 3.1 or something like that, to try and get all the best sources of information, the World Bank, the UN, in order to plot the trends. So that when people say, we have nostalgia for the 1960s, or we have nostalgia for the 18th century, and you can see very, very clearly what happened in the trends, and then plot this over time. So let's see how it goes.
Russia, Pakistan, and South Africa. And these were the results of the Swedish.
So you can see that he had a question, which country has the highest child mortality? And he gave people 2 options. So for example, Sri Lanka or Turkey. And he asked them, please tell us which country. And then he showed that Swedish students get this 1.8 out of 5 correctly, which is very, very low. We don't get this correctly.
Students. I did it, so I got a confidence interval which was pretty narrow, and I got happy, of course. I had 1.8 right answer out of 5 possible. That means that there was a place for a professor of international health and for my course. But one late night, when I was compiling the report, I really realized my discovery. I have shown that Swedish top students know statistically significantly less about the world than the chimpanzees. Because the chimpanzee would score half right. If I gave them 2 bananas with Sri Lanka and Turkey, they would be right half of the cases. But the students are not there. The problem for me was not ignorance, it was preconceived ideas. I did also an unethical study of the professors of the Karolinska Institute that hands out the Nobel Prize in medicine, and they are on par with the chimpanzee there. So this is where I realized that there was really a need to communicate, because the data of what's happening in the world and the child health of every country is very well aware. So we did this software which displays it like this. Every bubble here is a country. This country over here is this is China. This is India. The size of the bubble is the population. And on this axis here, I put fertility rate. Because my students, what they said when they looked upon the world, and I asked them, what do you really think about the world? Well, I first discovered that the textbook was Tintin mainly. And they said the world is still we and them. And we is Western world, and them is third world. And what do you mean with Western world? I said, well, that's long life in small family, and third world is short life in large family. So this is what I could display here. I put fertility rate here, number of children per woman, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about 8 children per woman. We have very good data since 1962, 1960 about, on the size of families in all countries. The error margin is narrow. Here I put life expectancy at birth, from 30 years in some countries up to about 70 years. And 1962, there was really a group of countries here that was industrialized countries, and they had small families and long lives. And these were the developing countries. They had large families, and they had relatively short lives. Now, what has happened since 1962? We want to see the change. Are the students right? It's still 2 types of countries? Or have these developing countries got smaller families and they live here? Or have they got longer lives and live up there? Let's see. We stop the world. And this is all UN statistic that has been available. Here we go. Can you see there? It's China. They're moving against better health. They're improving there. All the green Latin American countries, they are moving towards smaller families. The yellow ones here are the Arabic countries, and they get larger families, but longer lives, but not larger families. The Africans are the green down here. They still remain here. This is India. Indonesia is moving on pretty fast, and in the 80s here you have Bangladesh still among the African countries there, but not Bangladesh. It's a miracle that happens in the 80s. The imams start to promote family planning, and they move up into that corner, and in 90s we have the terrible HIV epidemic that takes down the life expectancy of the African countries, and all the rest of the world moves up into the corner where we have long lives and small family, and we have a completely new world.
It really is remarkable just how many people get it wrong about the status of the world and how much we've improved over the last 100 years. And what's nice about this is that since then, Hans Rosling and Gapminder have given us a lot of amazing tools where you can see the progress yourself and you can play with any of the factors. So if we open this, for example, you can see that Gapminder allows you to plot whatever it is that you want to get real data about what's happening in the world today and how it has evolved over time. So I just took exactly the same thing. So GPD per capita and life expectancy instead of mortality. And then here we can choose. So how do I make this smaller? Yeah, right. So here we can choose all kinds of things. So for example, I can take China, and then I can take the US, and then I can do some European countries. So let's say UK. And then I can just like play this in order to see what happened to the GDP per capita. I'm going to fast forward this to the 1920s. You can see that China is still here, over here on the left in GDP per capita. You can see generally the world is moving towards very high life expectancy and also GPT per capita. So it's quite amazing to see all the transformation, not just for China, but also for places like the US and the UK, a big improvement over time for all of us. So for people who say, I want to go back to the 19th century, to the 18th century, just think about what was happening in terms of the economics, in terms of life expectancy. First, the chances of you being born are very, very small because child mortality was very, very high. And then how long would you live? Maybe 30 years. Highest chances, 95% that you will be some kind of farmer, giving all your taxes to the royalty. But just over time, we see all these trends. We are so lucky to be living today in the world that we are in today. So you can put everything that you want. You can change life expectancy to whatever you want, to daily income, environment, health. So Gapminder and Hans Rosling have done an amazing service taking all of these databases and putting this into this kind of tool. So whenever somebody comes to you and says, you know, the economy is absolutely horrible, it's never been this bad, very, very easy. Go to Gapminder and see whether the economy has never been this bad. Whenever you have somebody telling you the health today is the worst it's ever been, has it really been, never been any worse than this? You can see what the implications are, all kinds of factors in order to see the state of the world. So I spend hours looking at these things in order to try and assess what's happening in the world today and to give me a sense of perspective about where we stand. So play with this as much as you want. Hans Rosling has shown that not only in Sweden and not only the people who give up the Nobel Prize, but generally the chimpanzees are over here, and most of the people in the world just don't answer correctly because they have all kinds of biases and misconceptions about the world. It's not that they randomly guess. If this was random guessing, they would be on par with the chimpanzees, but they're giving incorrect responses to this. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. What has happened with poverty is an absolute miracle. It's unbelievable, the world that we live in today. So you can see the share of people living in poverty, extreme poverty, and it's going down. There was a little bit of a blip during the COVID pandemic, but we're back on track to what it was before that. You can see over here the rate. So it's not that it's a good world to live in where we have 10% of poverty. But look where we were just in the 19th century, not too long ago. So Rosing is saying not that the world is perfect today, it's bad, but it's getting better, and it's getting better all the time. So in terms of poverty, we're in a state today that we've never been before, and not just in places like Africa, all over the world, poverty, is improving in on scale. Poverty rates, life expectancy keeps rising despite famines, everything, world wars and all that. We're getting to 72 years old, and here in Asia, in this region, getting very close to 85 years. So amazing. So this brings us to the question of what is causing this? Why are we biased? Why are we answering this correctly? Why are we so pessimistic about the world? Why are we getting all of these things incorrectly? So here's another very small bit for Hans Rosing regarding vaccinations.
The challenge we have now, is to get away from the understand where the majorities, and that was very clearly shown in this question. We asked, what is the percentage of the world's 1-year-old children who have got those basic vaccines against measles and other things that we've had for many years? 20, 50, or 80%. Now, this is what the US public and the Swedish answered. And you see, look at the Swedish result, you know what the right answer is. Who the heck is professor of global health in that country? Well, it's me. It's me. You see? It's very difficult. It's very difficult. However, Ola's approach to really measure what we know made headlines, and CNN published these results on their web, and they had the questions, there millions answered, and I think there was about 2,000 comments, and this was one of the comments. I bet no member of the media passed the test, he said. So Ola told me, take these devices, you are invited to media conferences, give it to them and measure what the media know. And ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, the informal result from a conference with US media. And then lately from the European Union media. You see, the problem is not that people don't read and listen to the media. The problem is that the media doesn't know themselves. What shall we do about this, Ola? Do we have...
So it's a big problem because there's a lot of trends, and the trends are going very well. I'm gonna just skip this, but if you want to see a lot of these graphs, then World in Data and Gapminder keep issuing this. So what are the sources of bias that we have? We have a lot of outdated facts. We have a lot of personal biases, my side bias. So Democrats and Republicans, or whatever the political affiliation is, tends to see things very, very differently. A lot of relying on intuitions and heuristics and biases. So Gapminder tried to summarize everything for us. Many of these things are things that I do research about. So for example, negativity bias is the tendency for us to focus on things that are negative. So we're going to look at 3 of those. So for example, the gap instinct, where we look at the distribution, but instead of seeing the entire distribution with a lot of things in the middle, we just see the 2 endpoints. So we see the very rich and the very poor, and we don't see all the middle class. So for example, in mainland China, one of the biggest miracles is mainland China being able to move a lot of people from the countryside into urban cities. And then now 80% of people in China are middle class and quite wealthy. Things that 3 decades ago just seemed absolutely impossible. So people don't look at the distribution. People don't see all the cases out there. They just compare the extreme, and they don't take the top view. One of the experts in our field, the person who I think is one of our smartest, biggest minds in social psychology, has really been very, very prolific. So you can see just all the books that he had coming out. We talked about Enlightenment Now, which is very similar to Hans Rosling Factfulness. But also he's a language expert, talks about and writes about how the mind works, Better Angels of Our Nature, and the Blank Slate. It's really a pleasure to listen to him. He's very articulate, and he talks about things with a lot of insight. Very, very prolific and very highly cited in academia. This is the book that I recommend if you read Factfulness. I think they should naturally follow after this. I'll let him summarize the big problem with the way that we get our news and how we see the main message here is that we have a lot of these biases. They're caused a lot by the media. He has a very, very good course now open for all of you. If you want to know more about these things, very articulate. And reasons for why we should be hopeful about the future, even when things look very, very bad. I think during the pandemic, when I gave these lectures, people were looking at me a little bit funny. What do you mean? Things are going really badly. The economy is worse. We quarantines. We don't socialize anymore. 3 years later, Nobody even remembers the pandemic. I think now we have other reasons for concern. Things are happening, wars in various places, and the economy is not as promising as perhaps it was. But generally, what you need to do is look at things as a trend and look at things that are happening around us that we don't normally notice. One of the things that we need to be very careful about is the news. So you can see, for example, after the Second World War, where we had very optimistic, positive news, the news and the social media and the influencers seem to understand that we pay more attention to things that scare us, and fear is something that drives us in engagement and clicks. You can see how the media has become over negative with the years. There's a lot of research that points into how negative media gets us to be more engaged and more fearful, when in fact the case is that there's no reason for the negativity to drive the news. Yeah, so there's lots of indicators for this. This is from our world in data, and they're very good at this. So for example, if there's a volcano and an earthquake, immediately there's lots of news. But in order for something to be considered as newsworthy, then you need I don't know, what is it, 38,920 deaths from food shortage. So there's a big misalignment between big things like earthquake, volcano, or let's say terrorist attacks compared to food shortages happening around the world. This is a little bit small, so I'm just going to read this out to you. These are the real causes of death. And you can see the biggest ones are heart disease, cancer, road incidents, and some disease, Alzheimer's disease, and respiratory diseases. But then what you can see, what is covered by the news or what people usually Google, mostly about terrorism. So 35% is terrorism, where terrorism here is less than 1%. And then people, suicide, homicide, the things that get capture the news and get you engaged are not the things that we should be caring about and covering, like cancer and heart disease. So there's a big misalignment between what's happening in the media and what we pay attention to, and what actually happens in media. Negativity instinct is something that I've done a lot of research on. Things are still bad, but they're getting better, and you should expect bad news, and you should expect bad news to linger a little bit longer than that. One of the biggest articles, it's called Bad is Stronger Than Good, and you have thousands of citations, and there's lots of evidence for this, and we found this again and again, is that people typically remember bad a lot more than they remember good. So for example, I experience this every semester when I get your evaluation. It could be that I get a lot of very nice evaluations, but there's this one critical student I really didn't like the course, and this is the thing that will linger with me forever. So it takes many, many good compliments for me to be able to cancel the one bad comment that I received. And I think it comes also in our relationship. You know, when we engage with other people and we get some negative feedback, it takes a while. We need to get a lot of positive feedback in order for this to cancel the negative. There's lots of MIBAS. I'm not going to go into this, but a lot of things came out from Gapminder to try and show us what's happening in the world and how the world is actually getting better. So when we think about Africa, a lot of people starving and need our help. But actually, it's interesting to try and see how people live in different places. So Dollar Street allows you to compare the living standards in places in the world, so Indonesia, Africa, South America, to what we experience in the very well-developed world. And to summarize all of this, there's lots of dangers that Steven Pinker was talking about, the danger of fatalism, the short-term focus, and undermining some contributions to progress. So when we think about all the negative things, and when we think about we're not well calibrated, and we have all these people telling us that they hold the facts and the facts are not accurate, then it has an ability to disable us from actually taking action and building things to make the world even better. So my main message and what I want you to take away from this session. So we started off from something about confidence. Are we overconfident? Are we underconfident? And we realized with Don Moore and others, Daniel Kahneman, that what we should aim for is calibration. We should base ourselves on the facts. It's not good to be overconfident. It's not good to be underconfident. So we need to aim for the truth. Do we know what the truth is? How do we gain some understanding of the truth? So we need to break it into little facts. So whenever you hear some big statement about the world is getting worse and things are not as expected, then you need to look at the trends. You need to break it into little details of what are we talking about? Is it child mortality? Is it the economy? Is it life expectancy? What is it that's getting worse? And then when you plot this and you look at the trends, then you can get your insights regarding the real trend, the real thing that's happening, and the facts from reliable resources of World Bank and the UN. And we have people like Hans Rosling and people like Steven Pinker that try to encourage us to base ourselves in rationality and thought, to seek out information, to make sure that we're well calibrated, to avoid biases, both in ourselves and coming from the media, and influencers. So main message is we're not perfect. The world is definitely not as good as it could be, but it is getting better over time. Even with all these blips and with all these COVIDs and with all the wars, when you look at the trend, this is definitely by far the best time to live in. Challenges ahead could be that next decade is going to be another blip and things are going to get even worse. But generally, when people are telling you that things are bad and you should dismantle the system and start from all over and take it all down, then you need to sit down and consider, is this based on facts or is there some agenda in there? So for your first project, this is what I want you to do. So when somebody tells you, gives you a message about something, just make sure that this is well calibrated, that it's based on evidence. What are the sources to look out and seek out information? So do the research. Go and look at the facts. Reassess what it is that they've done and make sure that you really know what's happening in the world. So this is all for this week. I received a lot of questions from the teaching assistants that you relate to them. I'll respond to this and we'll post everything on Zulip. If you have any questions, you don't need to wait for the tutorials or to meet with the teaching assistant. Zulip is there for you and I'll try to be very responsive. So please post your questions over there. Next week is reading week, so I'll see you the week after.